Story 1. Credit cards have been mentioned. What I have long found ironic is all the credit card benefits I receive. I get cashback and airline miles, which I love but do not really need. Meanwhile, people who could really use these benefits have no access to them. Story 2. Time. It takes much more time to be poor. I grew up poor and am not poor now. The amount of time money can save is significant. I no longer have to call several companies to negotiate part payments of bills, nor do I need to visit multiple shops to find discounts or shop on Christmas Eve after waiting for a Christmas bonus to buy gifts. It is not just about outsourcing services. That is obvious. Being poor requires dedicating time. Story 3. You get a small injury to something like your knee. You cannot afford the time off to let it heal, so it keeps getting worse until it needs to be replaced. But you cannot afford to get it fixed, and so on. Story 4. Constantly having to replace inexpensive items that break instead of purchasing quality products once is a hidden cost most people overlook. Story 5. It is obvious but not always considered by people who have not been in that situation. In general, if you cannot pay for something outright, it costs you more over time. Cannot pay for a car repair? You use your credit card and then pay it off with interest over time. Story 6. Others have made good points about hidden costs, but I would like to point out things you miss out on when you are barely scraping by. Discounts. If you do not have a buffer in your checking account, autopay is terrifying. No autopay discounts for the phone bill, internet, and so on. That is effectively a tax for not having money, buying in bulk or on sale. I have a chest freezer and buy a couple of extra packages of ground beef and other expensive frozen or freezable items when they go on sale. You cannot do that if you do not have the extra freezer space, cannot afford the extra electricity, or do not have the cash to buy extra groceries. Car, home, or renter's insurance. If the only zip code you can afford to buy or rent in carries a higher premium, you are penalized for being poor. Home maintenance and upgrades. When you are barely scraping by, you cannot afford to make improvements or changes that will bring down your energy bills or even just make your house more comfortable. Weatherization and efficient appliances pay for themselves over time, but if you cannot afford the upfront cost, you are stuck paying more. Story 7. If you do not have a car, buying groceries at local neighborhood corner stores is often more expensive than going to a large supermarket and has a worse selection of items such as fruits and vegetables. Story 8. The exhaustion from stress and constant worry takes a toll on your body, mind, and relationships. Story 9. If you have misaligned teeth, it is difficult to get hired for higher-paying positions. Costs a lot of money to fix teeth. You cannot get the money to fix them without a higher-paying job, so you are trapped. Most tooth decay is genetic. You can brush and floss all day, but without regular dental care, most people's teeth will deteriorate. Story 10. The fear stays with you forever, even long after it is no longer a concern. It reminds you it could be. Story 11. Worse environmental exposures are concentrated in poorer communities. This is found within the home, such as older and more toxic building materials and outdated gas stoves that emit excessive benzene, and outside the home, including higher air pollution and a lack of green spaces and trees. These factors are especially impactful on children. Also related, Flint, Michigan has a very high poverty rate. Cancer Alley is located in Louisiana. Story 12. No amount of saving and good financial decisions makes tomorrow easier. If your basic necessities cost more than your income, you literally cannot save anything. Suffering through poverty has no reward. All you get for surviving one day of poverty is another day of poverty. Story 13. In the broadest sense, interest rates matter. The poorer you are, the higher interest you pay on almost everything. It is like a punitive tax for not having enough money. Story 14. Getting ticketed. I received a traffic ticket and had to pay a $250 fine in addition to attending a driver's class. It was something I could afford and did not affect me much. However, for someone living in poverty, not paying that ticket could have serious consequences. Community service is an option, but if you are living paycheck to paycheck, that is time not working. For those wondering, I got the ticket for not slowing down enough when there was a police car on the median with its lights on the freeway. I could not move over because there were too many cars to my right. The officer clocked me going 46 miles per hour when I should have slowed down to 40 miles per hour. The speed limit on the freeway was 70 miles per hour. Story 15. Probably the mental cost children of poverty endure when they go to school and immediately get singled out as the poor child, because it is incredibly obvious who that is, even to children. Story 16. Dental health. Dentistry is not just a health service. It is also a lucrative career path. Lifelong solutions such as implants are priced so high that many people cannot afford them. Patients often get fillings which eventually fail. They receive root canals and crowns which are still expensive, and these also eventually fail. Some choose to pull teeth, the cheapest option, but then must rely heavily on the remaining teeth to chew food, which eventually causes problems for those teeth as well. This cycle continues. Dental insurance is often ineffective. Another challenge is living with or managing the pain. A dentist once told me that if you are in pain and cannot get help, consuming large amounts of hard liquor can dull the pain. Alternative solutions like this have obvious drawbacks. This does not even take into account the social issues related to missing teeth in your smile. The loss of self-esteem and social stigma can affect your ability to get a decent job, form social connections, and more. Story 17. Intelligence. I don't mean that in a poor people are unintelligent way. I mean that in a people constantly under stress are tired way. Stress and anxiety rob people of problem-solving skills, emotional availability, planning time, mental fortitude, and patience. Story 18. You may have a vehicle that is paid off, but it is often older and you pay the same or more in repairs. I had my first car for about 6 years and put approximately $14,000 into it during that time. I did not have enough money coming in to afford a real car payment, so that was the way it had to be. Story 19. Renting and not building equity. Heavy reliance on credit cards with high interest rates. High cost of college education and student loan interest and payments. High cost of childcare and insufficient paid time off. High cost of health insurance and inability to afford copayments. Story 20. Old housing comes with many more problems than you would think. Bugs and infestations, mold and water damage, unstable structures, doors that won't lock. This is a serious concern. You cannot keep your apartment cool during summer because of cracks in the window frame and door. Housing. Story 21. Growing up without parental guidance can be challenging. Parents often do not have the time or mental health capacity to provide support. This is why homework does not work well for lower-income students. They are too busy simply surviving, observing life from a distance. Story 22. Poor people have worse credit. Many companies perform credit checks as part of their background screening, and if they fail, they may not qualify for high-paying or even low-paying jobs, depending on the employer. Most low-rent apartment complexes do not maintain their properties well, leading to infestations of rodents, insects, and mold, which can cause poorer health compared to more affluent renters. Your neighborhood influences your car insurance rates. If you live in a poor area, you will face higher rates than if you live in a moderate neighborhood. Poverty changes brain chemistry, increasing stress, narrowing focus to immediate needs, and reducing critical thinking beyond survival. The police are less likely to help those who are poorer. People in poverty are more likely to be arrested, harmed, denied bail, unable to bond out, lose in court, or face imprisonment. Poor individuals are more likely to be denied banking services. Without access to banks, they often resort to cashing checks at gas stations, payday loan stores, or casinos, which charge higher fees. News feeds and social media ads targeted to poorer individuals differ from those targeted to more affluent people. For example, someone renting a phone may see more advertisements for quick money schemes, lotteries, and payday loans. Car ownership is more expensive for poorer individuals. They pay higher interest rates on loans, own vehicles in worse condition, and face higher risks of illegal towing or repossession without recourse. Poverty increases the risk of property theft without the ability to seek compensation. Mortgages available to poor individuals are often of the rent-to-own type, providing few rights to the renter or buyer. One could rent a home for decades and never own it if the owner decides to sell without disclosure. The mental toll of poverty includes being labeled negatively, such as useless, a parasite, or a welfare recipient. especially for those trapped in generational cycles of poverty. Poor neighborhoods are more likely to be targeted by eminent domain and exposed to environmental hazards like rendering plants, chemical plants, and coal-fired power plants, leading to higher rates of cancer, genetic disorders, disabilities, and asthma. Basic amenities such as banks, grocery stores, restaurants, medical offices, libraries, law firms, pharmacies, and home improvement stores are often scarce in high-poverty areas. When present, these are usually limited in number, hours, and accessibility. Finally, related to poverty, the average American family has a net worth of $200,000 at retirement, while the average Black family has $30,000. Story 23. An overlooked cost of being born into poverty is having to pay for everything yourself. My coworkers make about the same as me, so none of them are rolling in money. However, they all come from middle-class families, sometimes with grandparents or extended family who are even better off. And it makes a difference. None of them, I know from talking to them since we are all pretty close, bought their first vehicle themselves. They've all had family members who either had a spare junker they upgraded from and gave them or just bought them a cheap car outright. I have no family in a position to do that. Both I and the other youngest coworker are on our second vehicles. I paid $2,000 for my first and $10,000 for my second. She, making the same amount as me, paid $400 total for her two vehicles. The first was given to her, and the second was sold to her by her aunt for $400. While the first was a junker, the second was in great condition, comparable to the car I paid $10,000 for. When our vehicles break down, they have family members able to lend them a vehicle while theirs is being fixed. Either comfortably retired grandparents who have a vehicle but are okay not using it, or someone who owns multiple cars and can spare one. When my car is in the shop, I have to be without a vehicle for the duration. This last point is less significant but still reveals itself in our ability to take vacations. We all make roughly the same amount, some a little more or less, but they can travel more frequently and to farther or more lavish places than I can, beyond what I could responsibly afford because they are not covering the whole trip. They have a family member who owns a vacation property and loans it to them, or who has free tickets to a resort they do not use and give to them, or some other similar arrangement. They tell me they only had to pay for their flight to go on the trip. Even vacations cost more for me because such opportunities never happen to me. I have no family able to gift me something so extravagant as to essentially pay for half my vacation. I cannot go on vacation unless I can afford every cent of it. Story 24. If they cannot pay off their credit card bills every month, they are making every new purchase cost more than it should. Story 25. The spiritual damage of feeling less than others. Poverty amidst a sea of wealth demands an explanation for those trapped in the underclass. For many, the answer is to buy into the myth of social Darwinism. That can be soul-crushing. Story 26. Paying money for your money. Cash a check? Fee. Payday loan? Fee. Parking ticket because you had to hurry to get to work on time? Fee. Everything costs you money, including your money. Story 27. Not having an easy way to wash clothes. Doing a load of laundry can cost over $10 in many places. Getting a ticket and not being able to pay it can lead to a bench warrant, which can result in being in jail overnight and losing your belongings. Losing your identification when you do not have a home is a significant problem, and police officers often discard the documents of unhoused people. Being poor is difficult, and people often blame you instead of understanding that they could be in a similar situation if circumstances were unfortunate. Story 28. Eating healthy. You have a limited amount of money to last a couple of weeks. You can buy a few healthy items that will spoil in a few days or a large amount of highly processed junk food that will last a month. Story 29. Being unable to eat healthy because healthy food is expensive, and there is a lack of nutritional education causes health issues. These issues can develop into conditions that require eating healthy, but the inability to do so leads to medical bills and debt, making it even harder to maintain a healthy diet. Without a car, the situation becomes even more difficult. My grandmother is experiencing this exact problem right now, and I am sure it will affect me as well at some point. I have tried researching affordable healthy foods with her, but I am not a dietitian and barely know what to eat myself. Additionally, we have very limited cooking equipment. Most dietitians do not accept her insurance, Medicaid, and she has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Story 30. If we have homeless people using the emergency room for healthcare, we are paying for it at extremely high prices. It is cheaper to provide basic housing and healthcare for all and top-notch drug rehabilitation services. Taking care of our addicted people is the right thing to do. It improves our community and saves money. This is not what the original poster is asking. It is our cost to allow others to live in poverty. Story 31. You cannot afford to keep up with wealthy people, so everyone you know is poor as well. You do not participate in conversations about money or receive advice on how to handle opportunities. Additionally, your friends often need financial assistance. If you receive a little extra money, you do not keep it for long. Story 32. Your shoes fall apart. You cannot afford good shoes, so you buy some $10 shoes from Walmart. Your shoes fall apart again. You buy another pair of $10 shoes from Walmart. This cycle continues. You have now spent more money on shoes than you would have if you bought one pair of nice shoes that would last. However, that does not matter because you still would not have been able to afford the nice shoes. Story 33. Buying a cheap, old, or used car costs more when it keeps breaking down. Working more than one minimum wage job. Story 34. Having to move frequently because housing was condemned or sold unexpectedly. I grew up in a state with very few tenant laws and rented from negligent landlords. We moved every 6 to 12 months, usually with only a few days' notice, because the house was condemned by the city or the landlord sold the property to someone else. Story 35. Living in high-poverty neighborhoods has been identified as a contributing factor to the development and progression of chronic kidney disease. Story 36. There are only so many good decisions a human can make in one day. I remember seeing Barack Obama having a closet full of identical suits as president, and he said it was because as president he had so many decisions to make every day that he didn't even want to think about what clothes to wear. Being poor is kind of the opposite. You often have so many things to juggle just to keep treading water that, after a while, you're just done and end up saying, forget it. Saying forget it to things that other people have the mental bandwidth to think about carefully ends up with negative consequences that help keep you poor. Story 37, kinda unusual, but if you have been there, you have been there. The cost of living trap. If you get priced out of an area, you can realistically get trapped and not be able to leave, all while losing money and never being able to save. I had a bad situation during the pandemic where rent increased so much that I didn't have any money to move elsewhere, so I was at the mercy of rent increases. I could pay my rent plus 2, 5, 10%, but I couldn't afford the strict requirements to move somewhere else. Income 3 times the rent, security deposit of first and last month plus pet deposit. Sometimes, even if you want to, you literally cannot escape being poor. Story 38. Being able to save money on groceries is very important. One big thing I can do now that I am making a decent living is buying in bulk when items are on sale at the grocery store. For example, if you buy 4, it is 30% off. Or with a buy one get one offer, I always buy as many as allowed. The upfront cost is higher, but in the long term, you save a lot. If you do not have enough weekly cash, you end up buying single items at a higher cost. Story 39. Paying for laundromats versus owning a washing machine costs you hundreds of dollars a year and a lot of your time that you could be using for other activities, including earning income. Story 40. Time. It is important to note that the average person in America is either in or close to poverty. The average American cannot afford a $1,000 disaster, such as a large unexpected expenditure, and cannot go without work for a month because they would become homeless. That is why the lockdowns were so detrimental to many people and businesses. Most people cannot afford not to work. They work because they must to avoid homelessness. Time is the biggest loss, spending time commuting to work and back using public transit and getting groceries if they can. Time is also spent going to the library to use a computer because they do not have one at home. For people living in poverty, time works against them. They are paid based on time but lose money because of it. True wealth comes when a person is no longer bound to a clock. Story 41. Unhealthy food is cheaper than healthy food, which leads to unhealthy lifestyles and health problems, increasing total healthcare costs in countries with nationalized healthcare. It is literally cheaper in the long run to give poor people money than to let them struggle on their own. Story 42. Car insurance rates are higher because of your credit, living in a high-crime area, and having a loan on a vehicle that requires full coverage because you needed something reliable. Story 43. Pretty much everything. There are fairly obvious things that people sometimes don't think about, like banking fees hurt poor people a lot more, especially if you get into non-sufficient funds fees. Oh, you don't have enough money? Now it costs you more money because you didn't have enough. The less obvious example is almost everything you buy. When you have money, you can pay more for something that will last longer. When you're poor, you often can't. A good example is boots. Say you need boots for work or something. The poor person may only be able to afford the cheap $50 pair of boots that last 2 years. Then a more well-off person can afford to buy the $150 boots that last 10 years. So over 10 years, the poor person has spent $250 on boots compared to $150. Any and all sales taxes hurt poor people more, stuff like that. Story 44. Debt costs more and you are always in debt. You borrow £1,000 to buy a car. It is not very good for that price. You pay back half and the poor quality car breaks down. You take out £1,500 to cover the remaining loan and another £1,000 for a new car. Vens, rins, reput. Meanwhile, the annual percentage rate on your loans is getting worse because it looks like you are sinking into debt because you are. Story 45. This book, Poor Economics, has many examples of this. One of those is nutrition. Not the cost of nutrition, but rather the motivation. It is hard to stay away from processed feel-good food when other entertainment in life is limited due to lack of money. When unhealthy food can give instant satisfaction, people in poverty end up consuming it more. Story 46. The concept of working hard. You do work hard, don't get me wrong, but you don't work as hard as someone who cannot even afford glasses or dental care. You do not get a cozy, warm bed to sleep in when you are freezing and trying to sleep in your winter clothes. Story 47. Dentistry and dental issues. Either you cannot afford to go to the dentist at all and develop dental problems, or you can only afford a poor quality dentist. As a result, you may have to keep paying dentists to fix the bad work other dentists did. It also does not help that much cheap food is bad for you and your teeth. Story 48. When things break, that's it. You cannot afford a new washing machine, so you have to pay to go to the laundromat, which costs more over time. Story 49. Energy. When you are poor, you are always working multiple jobs, trying to find any chance to make money. Most of the jobs are physically demanding as well. Story 50. The cheap boots theory, or whatever it is called, suggests that a poor person cannot afford to pay $250 at once for boots, so they pay every year for low-quality $70 boots. The richer person buys expensive boots and wears them for years. In the long run, the poor person will actually spend more than the rich person. This idea likely applies to many things, especially cars. Story 51. One missed paycheck, pay error, lost wages, or emergency expense is not just about paying late fees and throwing money at the problem. It creates a massive chain reaction of expenses that spins wildly out of control very quickly and can keep you trapped in an indefinite failure state. Even if you budget tightly and count every penny, there are few safety nets to help you out of a tight spot. A late paycheck can result in overdraft fees and late fees in other areas such as utilities and rent. If you do not pay those, your utilities and bank account can be shut down. Late fees stack fast, and you must take money from other areas of your budget to compensate, such as going without car gas, food, or medical treatment. If your utilities get turned off, you may have to pay a fee for breaking a contract and another fee to restore service. It is easy for your debts to be sent to collections. If you are unable to pay collections, they can garnish up to 25% of each paycheck until the debt is satisfied. You will also face interest and numerous fees on top of your debt, keeping you trapped in that cycle even longer. If your creditor sells your debt, the buyer will tack on all sorts of fees, making it harder to pay everything off. Evictions, credit damage, and bankruptcies will severely impact your ability to secure housing, a vehicle, jobs, emergency loans, and more. Many landlords check credit scores, which creates barriers to finding housing. Without a home address to put on a job application, finding steady employment becomes a huge challenge. If you need a loan to fix your vehicle, your credit score will affect your ability to get one. Story 52. Programs like Medicaid, low-income housing, and some forms of welfare require you to be below a certain income threshold. However, the threshold is so low that being slightly above it is not sustainable. There is a window where something positive, such as a raise or a better job, could actually be catastrophic to your livelihood because it will disqualify you from benefits you will no longer be able to afford after the raise or job improvement. Story 53. Nutrition requires ensuring that the food you buy does not spoil before you eat it and is economical. This often leads to purchasing a lot of prepackaged and processed food, which can damage your metabolism. Eating out at fast food restaurants instead of real restaurants negatively impacts your health. Story 54. I would say that there are some things you can do to improve your health, but it is considered a luxury. Since they cannot afford those luxuries, their health will not be as good. One obvious example is if you can afford to go to the dentist just for cleaning, you will probably have better dental health. The dentist can also identify some problems in early stages that will not cost you as much. Another example is massages. Massages can really help you in the long term. Story 55. Not being able to spend $100 on a new pair of shoes that will last years in one purchase, so you end up buying 10 pairs of $20 shoes over 2 years. Story 56. Pet health care includes preventative flea and heartworm medicine and dental care. If you cannot afford prescriptions, you may resort to ineffective flea baths from discount stores and home remedies. As a result, your pets are less playful, become ill, and have shorter lifespans. This can lead to unexpected, costly veterinary bills at inconvenient times. Pet health care is similar to human health care, although it is not something people often consider. Story 57. Many healthy foods are a luxury. I have had this exact argument with someone who said that lettuce is cheap at a few dollars a head. Lettuce has effectively 0 calories and does not stave off hunger. It is a luxury. The list of healthy and inexpensive foods is not as large as people think. In a food desert, that list is even smaller. Junk food is often the cheapest available form of calories. Story 58. Flat rate taxation sounds perfectly fair but impacts poor people more because of how costs scale. This includes percentages. Suppose you use Herman Cain's proposed flat rate 9% income tax. Everyone pays 9% of their income. The problem is that people pay very different percentages of their income on necessities. Alex makes $40,000 a year and rents a cheap apartment for $1,000 a month, paying 30% of their income on housing. Bob makes $300,000 a year and pays $4,000 a month on a mortgage, which is 16% of his income. Most expenses follow a similar pattern. People with higher income have higher expenditures, but these are not proportional to their income. At the end of the year, Bob might have 20% or more of his income available and can handle the 9% flat tax with no trouble. Meanwhile, Alex struggles to find the last few dollars to pay that 9% tax bill. Story 59. You cannot take advantage of compound interest or good market conditions. The best tools to gain wealth are not available to you. The opportunity cost of poverty is profound. Good luck ever retiring. The thing you need most is the thing you cannot have because you need it most. It is absurd. Story 60. How expensive it is. $1 short in your checking account costs you $35 for an overdraft fee. Juggling bills to feed your child and paying a bill late costs a $30 late payment fee. The list goes on. Story 61. The health toll no one talks about. Eating inexpensive processed food because it is all you can afford. Stress-induced health issues from constant financial anxiety. Avoiding doctors until it is an emergency. Poverty literally shortens your lifespan. Story 62. As a general rule, cheap products are less effective and need to be replaced more frequently than expensive products. Buying $20 shoes ends up being more expensive than buying $200 ones because you have to replace the $20 ones so often. Story 63. Cannot purchase in bulk and end up paying more per unit because of this. For example, cannot afford to pay $30 for a 30-roll pack of toilet paper at $1 per roll. can only afford $20 for a 12-roll pack at $1.60 per roll. It ends up being 60% more expensive to be poor in the end. Edit. Pulled those numbers from the Costco and Raley's websites. I cannot imagine the difference in inner cities where the only options nearby are liquor stores or bodegas. Story 64. There is a fairly well-known Boots theory from the Discworld books. The reason that the rich were so rich, Vims reasoned, was because they managed to spend less money. Take boots, for example. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50. But an affordable pair of boots, which were okay for a season or two and then leaked when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. The thing was that good boots lasted for years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still keep his feet dry in 10 years, while a poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. It is obviously not perfectly accurate. There are many cases where you pay more for the label than the quality of the product, especially when talking strictly about footwear. But it is generally accurate. There are many ways to save money if you have the money up front to do so. Something as simple as shopping at a bulk store like Sam's Club or Costco can save you a good amount of money if you can afford the membership and the price of those big packages. Story 65. Everything related to vehicles creates challenges. If you cannot get your vehicle fixed, you cannot have it inspected, which may result in a ticket for missing inspection. Without repairs, the problem worsens until the vehicle breaks down completely. Without insurance, you face more tickets. Eventually, you may lose your license, requiring you to pay fees, take classes, and complete other requirements to regain it. Meanwhile, finding a job becomes difficult without reliable transportation. If you cannot own a vehicle, you may need to pay higher rent to live closer to work in a city where walking or biking is possible. Without a vehicle, grocery shopping requires careful planning, as you can only carry limited items, and some perishables may spoil before reaching home. Story 66. As an adult, not feeling worthy of success. Not negotiating for higher pay because you do not have enough self-worth. Feeling uncomfortable around well-off people. As a child, wondering why bad kids get toys, new clothes, and go to restaurants while you are trying to be a good kid and those rewards are not available to you. Also, your friend group is generally other poor kids. Story 67. I've seen some good answers here, but one that I am not seeing, which is common for children in poverty, is growing up with parents who do not have the education or mental health to teach their children how to be functional humans. As a result, we end up having to learn how to be functional in adulthood, which further delays our ability to reach our goals. Story 68. The cost of poverty is surprisingly high. Being poor often means you cannot pay bills on time, which leads to late fees and extra charges. If you cannot afford to pay traffic tickets, you risk going to jail, causing you to miss work and fall even further behind. Instead of escaping hardship, the expenses and penalties keep piling up, making it even harder to get ahead. Story 69. As someone with back problems, this is a quote that has stuck with me for years. Wealthy people receive massage therapy. Economically disadvantaged people receive oxycodone. Story 70. Buying cheap appliances that break every 2 months turns out affordable is just a scam to make you pay twice as much. Story 71. Late fees. If you already cannot afford to pay your bill on time, why do they think you can pay your bills with extra fees? That is simply companies punishing you for being poor. Story 72. I have always had very bad teeth caused by a childhood dentist who drilled holes where there were none. Issues began to appear with those holes when I was in college and could not afford dental work, so I ignored them. I only had my teeth checked if I was in unbearable pain. Leaving dental problems untreated leads to more issues. Eventually, I got on my feet, and as soon as my credit cards were paid off, I started fixing my teeth. The result was 8 root canals in 2 years, each costing $1,500 before insurance. I do not remember exactly how much I ended up paying, but insurance only covered a small portion. I could have avoided all of this if I had been able to afford dental care when the problems first started. Story 73. The need to maintain relationships. Few people in poverty can survive as loners. They end up becoming interdependent with other people in similar circumstances and trade favors and social currency. When you have money, you have the freedom to do your own thing. Story 74. If you are not good at math, it is nearly impossible to get out. I grew up in poverty, and now my husband and I each make over $100,000. I used to shop at the more expensive grocery store because everything was sold individually by weight. I could make do for a few weeks with a pint of milk, a handful of potatoes, a few onions, a scoop of flour, and so on. It was more affordable than buying bulk at the time because I could get a nutritious variety of things in very small quantities. I shop at the cheaper bulk stores now because I can mindlessly swipe my card for a 10-pound sack of potatoes, a 2-pound bag of onions, a 10-pound bag of flour, a multi-pack of pasta, and so on. I do not have to worry about the weekly grocery bill, and it is not devastating if some food goes off before we can eat it. It was like that with everything. I would scrimp and save to buy a single nice shirt on clearance for work. Now I can buy a piece of clothing when I want because I like it. I can keep the heat or air conditioning at the temperature I want instead of setting it just to take the edge off. My husband and I are both fairly frugal, so we are able to save massively without making a budget right now, and it is so freeing. I never have to sit down on payday and calculate which bills I can pay, how much food I can afford, or whether I can save up $30 for a day at the Renaissance Festival in 3 months. Story 75. If you need therapy, a doctor, or any other type of care, often you cannot afford it and go without, which only worsens the situation. Story 76. If you cannot afford to regularly visit the dentist, you will develop severe oral health problems that will cost you thousands of dollars. Even if you find a dentist willing to treat you and accept payments, you will essentially be in debt to them indefinitely. Story 77. Late fees may be applied if a bill is unpaid for 30 to 45 days. The customer needs to pay 2 months to be current, including the late fees. They must accumulate more cash to buy themselves additional time. Story 78. Mold is in everything, and when something does not have regular maintenance, it has even more mold. Also, time is a factor. People with limited resources are taxed in time. Cannot afford a subscription? Watch advertisements. Cannot afford an attorney? You must go through many hoops and fill out numerous forms after seeing several people, all of whom require an appointment and waiting in line. Cannot afford to pay for a mechanic? You have to fix it yourself, learning as you go and making mistakes because you are not a mechanic. Additionally, there are late fees. Cannot afford the vehicle registration fees this month? That will cost you extra. Cannot afford to file your taxes on time? That will cost you. Overdraft because you do not have enough money? That will cost you. Story 79. Stress is the biggest invisible problem. It is one of the worst things you can do to your health. Constant stress leads to extra costs, medical bills, and missed work. You need effective coping mechanisms, or you may develop unhealthy and expensive habits like drug or alcohol use. Stress will impact your friendships and relationships. Any kind of maintenance is important. The saying, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure," is true but irrelevant if you cannot afford either. My brake pads are worn nearly all the way down and have damaged the rotors, making the repair more expensive than it should be. Work is expensive. Parking in the garage costs $45. There is the cost of gas and maintaining a car to get there. I need to buy supplies for my lower-class blue-collar job, such as $100 work pants and a couple $1,000s in tools, batteries, and safety harnesses, which have all been stolen from my car before. I must pay for training on my own time, unlike my friend who works at Deloitte and had her Master of Business Administration paid for by the company. I buy all my own food, unlike employees at tech companies with campuses that provide on-site food. Cooking at home, especially when starting out, requires kitchen utensils and pots and pans to be collected first. You need to have ingredients on hand. The trial and error of learning to cook can be frustrating. The feeling of having no money, ruining a dinner, and still being hungry is soul-crushing. Story 80. Walk it off is really just let the problem compound into a bigger and even more unaffordable issue in the future. Story 81. Time. Almost everything takes longer to accomplish. Personal transportation and rented transportation usually are not an option. If you have a bicycle, it still takes at least 3 times as long to reach a destination. Public transportation can be quicker than a bicycle, but you are dependent on the schedule and occasional delays. Work, grocery shopping, entertainment outings, you have to plan extra time into everything you do. Story 82. You do not have money to buy good products. You have to buy the cheapest products you can find. They break or wear out much faster, and you have to buy them again repeatedly. Story 83. When you are broke, you cannot make payments on time. When you cannot make payments on time, the people you owe money to charge interest and fees. When you eventually catch up, it ends up being more expensive. Inevitably, that means you missed a payment on something else and need to pay the interest and fees on that as well. Story 84. You can pay £1,500 in rent reliably for 10 years, and yet a bank will not believe you can afford to pay £1,000 a month for a mortgage. Story 85. Clean air zones have been established in cities. These do not affect wealthier individuals who already have new cars that are exempt. However, people who can only afford older, more polluting cars must pay £9 a day to enter the clean air zone. This is effectively a tax on the poor. Story 86. When you are poor, every decision becomes a calculation. Not in a strategic, long-term planning way, but in a desperate, survival-driven way. If you eat an extra piece of bread today, you may not be able to afford the bus tomorrow. If you buy your child a toy, you might not have enough for medicine next week. This kind of decision-making is not just occasional. It happens every single day. This cognitive load leaves less space for everything else. Rest, joy, planning, and dreaming. Story 87. The shame and embarrassment of being in poverty. You are seen as not good enough. The public does not like you. Politicians use it as a political football, and the system is designed to keep you in poverty. Story 88. Inexpensive products do not last, so you end up spending more money over time because you have to keep purchasing them repeatedly. Story 89. Many jobs in the mid to low income bracket, often those with the least barriers to entry, such as not requiring a degree to get hired, are the same ones that tax your body the most. Prolonged standing is harmful, as are repetitive use injuries. Even hazardous materials jobs are poorly compensated for the workers they rely on the most, that is, those lowest on the career ladder. When you are not making much money, requesting change or seeking accommodations by seeing a doctor and obtaining a note can be unaffordable simply because it involves time away from earning income. Story 90. You are always buying cheap items and replacing them when they break because you never have the chance to save for something reliable. Everything is always breaking. See also Boots theory. Story 91. Time is a big factor. I couldn't afford a car for a long time. I had to walk everywhere. Work was about an hour's walk away. Then I stood for 8 to 12 hours, depending on how short-staffed we were scheduled. After that, I walked an hour home. The bus system was unreliable. Need groceries? That was 40 minutes in the other direction. Without a car, I had to carry everything, so making bulk purchases to save money was not an option. Needless to say, shoes became a significant expense. Story 92. While buying fresh food is affordable, the energy to cook and prepare it is often lacking. Being poor is a war of attrition on your cognitive function. Each day, throughout everything you do, there is a crushing feeling of dread lingering in the background. Not consciously, but flashing through everything you do. What if I messed up and lost my job today? What if my car didn't start? What if the bus was late and I was late to pick up my kids? Which bill am I most behind on? What are the consequences if I put that one off a few more days? Is the uncertain childcare situation I've got my kids in right now going to damage them forever? That aunt is getting old. I'll bet she's smoking around them even though she insists she's not. Are they getting laughed at in school for their clothes being too small? And so on. Not that we don't all have worries, but the stakes on a poor person's every worry are so high. The idea of cooking something at the end of the day feels exhausting to most people. But what if you've literally been in survival mode all day, every day, for years? Preparing and cooking some real food would be better for us. But that's 30 fewer minutes with my kids. I already come home so late. They might not like it. The thought of having to throw out their serving might literally make me cry. I've already caught strep from them 2 times this winter. I can't keep it for leftovers. and they still need to eat. You know what they do like? Frozen nuggets and tater tots. Protein, vitamins, tater tots or potatoes. You think to yourself, imagining what the judgmental people on cable news or social media would say, carbs and fats to keep them full until the next meal. You can give them a few pieces at a time so that you can safely eat what's left, if there is any. Nuggets and tots taste the same way every time. You know they'll eat them. Hell, you'd feed them rotisserie chicken at least if the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program let you buy it. But you can't. God, you'd kill for just a soda. You've given your full self all day and it would be nice to just have a Coke. But you're not allowed to buy that either. You put your kids to bed, eating whatever scraps are safe, and absolutely collapse into bed. Meanwhile, someone online who has never worried about where their next meal is coming from argues about your situation in a thread on social media about how expensive it is to buy fresh food. While they may be technically correct, that doesn't make them right. Story 93. Your teeth getting damaged and going from routine dental work to receiving a $70,000 bill for an abscess that nearly killed you. Laundromats. Prepay power metering. The finance contract details on a mobile or trailer home are extremely one-sided. Having to buy new shoes, jeans, and other clothes more often because the products from Target only last about 3 months. 8% annual percentage rate versus 13% annual percentage rate versus 26% annual percentage rate. Story 94. The car that is broken down on the road is causing heavy traffic. They were too poor to have their car fixed, and now everyone pays the price. Story 95. Being poor is not just about not having money. It is about paying more for everything. Without a car, you are stuck with expensive rideshares or unreliable public transit. Living paycheck to paycheck means missing out on deals and paying higher interest rates. Your health suffers because you cannot afford care, and your credit score drops, making everything from renting an apartment to getting a loan harder. Even simple things like groceries cost more because you are forced to shop at convenience stores instead of bulk retailers. It is a cycle where being broke costs you extra, and getting ahead feels nearly impossible. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.